Today we'll look at a simple and seemingly absurd question, one that we'll need to go back in time to answer. If Boban had played in the 90s, would he currently be in the Hall of Fame? Boban is a bit of a cult hero among NBA fans. He's played 5 years in the NBA and has suited up for just as many teams. That's never seemed to matter to the fans of the team he's on at the moment. He's always been a bit of a local icon. Most importantly, Boban has always held a soft spot in my heart, which led to the topic of this video. I have long suspected if Boban had played in the 90s, he'd currently be in the Hall of Fame. To answer this question, the first thing we need to look at is the list of Hall of Fame centers from the 90s. We can then compare Boban's projected productivity to their actual production with the hopes of answering the question. 4 names immediately come to mind of most when discussing Hall of Fame centers from the 90s. Those names would be Shaq, Olajuwon, Robinson, and Ewing. These 4 set the gold standard for centers in their era. There is a second tier of well-known but less capable centers who are also in the Hall of Fame from the 90s. Take a moment and see if you can guess the names. The second tier is made up of Sabonis, Mourning, Divac, and Mutombo. The question at hand isn't whether Boban would have been good enough to be in the first tier, because the answer is no. But instead, could Boban have had a more productive career than any of these 4? Could Boban have dethroned one of these players? For his career, Boban has averaged a pedestrian 6 points and 4 rebounds per game, yet the advanced metrics love him. For example, he boasts one of the best player efficiency ratings and points per field goal attempted in NBA history. It's fairly self-evident that his offense doesn't keep him on the bench. Rather, he lacks the foot speed needed to guard anything outside of the paint. In today's highly spaced game, his elite offensive ability aside, he's just too much of a liability on defense to play major minutes. Hence the question of looking back on if Boban's career took place in the 90s, when a center was expected to protect the rim, guard other centers, and grab rebounds. There wasn't a lot more to it than that. You didn't have to worry about the center you're guarding drifting out to the three-point line for a corner 3. At most, it was a short corner jump shot. For reference, in the 94-95 season, not a single center shot more than 1 3-pointer a game. The league leader was Vlade Divac at 0.7 per game. This season, 36 centers attempted at least 1 3-pointer per game. Robin Lopez would have been the leading 3-point shooter in 94-95 by a factor of 2. Even in the 90s, with the much narrower defensive assignments, Boban would not have been in the same defensive league as this Hall of Fame class, especially the Tier 1 players. With the exception of Shaq, all the Tier 1 players are known as much for their defense as their offense. Though he wouldn't have made any all-defensive teams or been considered an anchor, he would have been a serviceable defender. He shows good effort on defense, and slow foot speed aside, his standing reach and wingspan are elite. It's hard to measure one's post defense in today's NBA because there is so little traditional posting up. In the limited sample though, he's shown to be competent at defending other centers in the paint and far from a liability. Defense isn't what makes Boban special though. It's his out-of-this-world rebounding and scoring.
Boban, he's like instant buckets, man. It's fun to watch him play.
Skilled giant.
Never play with a guy like Boban. Maybe Shaq.
His scoring is even more impressive given plays are never run for him. Let's take a quick look at his productivity in the 2 most important statistical categories for a center, scoring and rebounding. To help account for the faster pace in today's game, we'll look at productivity on a per 100 possessions basis. I also screen for each player's top 10 seasons to try and truly capture their prime. For players such as Sabonis and Boban, who have less than 10 NBA seasons played, I use their entire NBA careers. When we take a look at points per 100 possessions, you'll see Boban sits squarely between the Tier 1 and 2 grouping. He blows Vlade Divac and Mutombo out of the water. Yes, Mutombo was a vastly better defender, and Vlade was a better playmaker, but their pure scoring prowess was far below that of Boban. Boban's offensive productivity is actually pretty well documented, but I don't think his rebounding is discussed enough. The NBA has seen many players carve out all-star careers through being one-dimensional rebounders. The leading rebounder among Hall of Fame centers in the 90s was Mutombo at 17.4 per 100 possessions. Among the 8 Hall of Fame centers, the difference between first and last in rebounds was 2.9. Boban is so much in a league of his own that he leads the top of the pack to Dikembe Mutombo by 3.3 rebounds. This chart helps better highlight just how elite a rebounder Boban is. Would Boban be in the Hall of Fame if he played in the 90s? It's hard to say. By all accounts, he was a late bloomer, not arriving in the NBA until age 27, and his stats weren't exactly out of this world in Europe, meaning even if his game did translate as well to the 90s as I think they would, his prime would have been a short one. With more bruising centers to play against and defenses focusing more attention on him, some of his per-possession stats would likely decline. At minimum, he likely would have made multiple All-Star games, and who knows, if he was paired with the right players and won a ring or two, he'd likely be in the conversation for the Hall of Fame over one of the current Tier 2 players. What do you think? Do you think he'd be a great player? Or is this just a case of me going too far into the analytical weeds and trying to prop up a career 6-point, 4-rebound per game player into something he's not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.